for those of you who may be in a job seeker space, hopefully you'll be able to walk away from this conversation with some new understanding of how things work. For those of you who work in the TA space or the recruiting agency space, some of the initial content may be a little redundant. I'm sure you all know how recruiting processes work, but I did want to kind of lay the groundwork for those who may not know that. It may be secondhand to many of us on the call, but for some, they've never been involved in recruiting, so they really don't understand. And I wanted an opportunity for us to kind of shed some light on it so that they understand the different steps involved, but then also how when any one of those goes sideways, it can be problematic and ultimately impact them. So just a quick agenda. Just review, what does the internal recruiting process look like? What is the difference between internal recruiting and agency recruiting? The blame game that I referenced earlier. What are the benefits of working with agencies to job seekers and to employers? What are some tips for job seekers when working with agencies? What are tips for job seekers during interviews? And then what open questions and comments do we have? And then just a couple of thank yous. And if there's anything that I didn't touch on, again, feel free to bring it up. I want us to have open conversation with all of this. So this is a very general outline of what an internal recruiting process may look like. They're all different, and every organization is going to have their own nuances, but in general, this is kind of an outline of what happens in a recruiting process, right? A hiring manager, the person who has the opening, likely the manager of whomever it is that they would be hiring, reaches out to human resources or talent acquisition. Now, again, for those of you who may not know, larger organizations typically have a dedicated recruiting or talent acquisition team, and smaller organizations often don't have them segregated, and it's just all under HR. So it just really depends on the structure of the company. But for purposes of this, I kind of put them together. So the hiring manager reaches out to HR or TA to say, hey, I need to open a requisition. I have a job that maybe it's a new job or somebody left and we need to backfill this position. So typically what would then happen is that the TA folks would meet with that hiring manager to discuss, several different topics. Why is the position open? Is it a backfill? Is it a new position? Define the role. If it's a new position, really define what is the purpose of the job, where does it fit in the organization, what are the qualifications, what will this person be doing, how does it benefit the organization, what does the compensation structure look like for this particular role, does it meet the qualifications for an exempt role or a non-exempt role, meaning salary or hourly. What is the timeline to fill it? Is this something that you want filled immediately? Is it something you want filled, 30, 60, or 90 days from now? So there's lots of questions there. And then for organizations that don't have a well-defined interview and selection process, there may be conversation about who would you like to participate in interviewing candidates when we identify candidates, and what would that look like, and identifying what that interview process looks like. So some companies have a very defined interview process where there's really no questions. It's this interview first, then this interview, and then this interview. Some don't. So again, this is a generalized outline of what happens throughout an internal recruiting process, but every organization does have their own nuances. Assuming the requisition is approved by finance or the executive VP of that department, the job is posted and sourcing begins. So sometimes, I'm sure those of you in TA have experienced this because I know I have. You'll be going down the path of recruiting for a position only to find out that it was never actually approved by finance. Right? I see smiles on faces. I know those of you who work in TA know this pain. So it's definitely something that does happen. So it's really important to find out did that financial approval happen on the front end? Did that requisition actually get approved? And for organizations that use an applicant tracking system that includes requisition approval, that can be very helpful. For companies who don't use that, sometimes it's a matter of truly tracking it down, but that can delay things as well. So once we're sure that the requisition is approved and the sourcing begins, there's a couple of different things that happen. And when I say sourcing, there's multiple layers of sourcing. It can be, as I put here on the screen, the talent acquisition folks will search in their current applicant tracking system for anyone who meets the qualifications of this particular job, if there's a keyword searches. So they're going to look at whatever resumes and whatever applicant pool they already have that already exists, as well as posting it to external job sites like LinkedIn or Indeed or CareerBuilder or whatever, Ladders, whatever they're using. It could also include so many different types of advertising. It could be Facebook, it could be social media, it could be radio, it could be billboards. There's multiple layers of sourcing. It could also be that they reach out to an agency and let them know, hey, I've got this position open, and if you have anybody you'd like to submit, here's when we're going to start seeing candidates. So every position may be sourced in different ways. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody. So please, I want this discussion open because there's no single thread answer to this. There's multiple layers here. As applications and resumes start to come in, typically what would happen is the talent acquisition team or the HR team would start to screen through those resumes. And there's usually one of two things that happens here. Either the HR team screens the resumes and says, okay, I believe these fit the criteria. I'm going to send these over to the hiring manager to look at. Or they may say the hiring manager wants to look at every resume that comes through the door, and they just send them all over. Sometimes HR or TA will screen the resumes and conduct the initial phone screens before providing names and resumes to the hiring manager. Again, every process is different, but there's usually some level of initial resume or application screen, sometimes a phone screen, and then sometimes it can go to the hiring manager, depending on their process. If the candidates are screened and they believe that they've passed the phone screen, they said, wow, this person meets the basic criteria, I want the hiring manager to interview them, then they will pass the resumes and potentially interview notes to the hiring manager, and they will then invite them to interview with the hiring manager and potentially other folks within the organization. Candidates who do not pass that phone screen are usually declined at this point and informed that they won't be moving forward in the process. If you're invited to come in, you'll come, well, on site or via video these days. You'll do your interviews with the hiring manager, with other folks within the organization. It could be a peer interview. It could be other executives. It just, again, really depends on the position and the organization. And this is often where the bottleneck occurs. This is often where everything comes to a halt. And there's multiple reasons for that. We'll get into those in just a minute. But there's more interviews scheduled and candidate is either declined or everybody loves the candidate and we're going to extend an offer. If an offer is extended, that is when the background check and the drug screen are initiated. A lot of job seekers don't understand that neither one of these two elements can happen before an offer is extended. And they get very frustrated. I've heard it myself for years. Why did they wait to do this to the very end? I don't want to come in for all these interviews if I know I'm not going to pass the drug screen or the background check or what have you. There are laws around why this happens. So we cannot initiate a background check or a drug screen before an offer of employment is made. Now, it can be a verbal offer, but those things there has to be an order of job offer to background check and drug screen. If the contingencies are cleared, meaning the person passes the background check or the drug screen, then you can schedule their start date and orientation ensues and everybody's happy. So I mentioned back in the process when the hiring manager and the other folks conduct the interviews, that's where the bottleneck can happen. And I would love to hear from those of you who have experienced this. But what I hear often online is that no one ever gets back to you, or HR, they're lazy, they don't give us feedback, we never hear back. And in my experience, which is over 20 years of experience within HR and always been involved in TA, where the breakdown usually happens is that the HR and TA folks are not getting feedback from the individuals with whom the candidates have interviewed. That is typically what the delay is at this point in the process. It's not because HR and TA don't want to give feedback to someone, whether they are moving on or being declined. It's a matter of getting the hiring managers and the rest of the folks who interviewed to provide feedback. Yes, no, here's why not, that type of thing. So I don't know if we want to take a quick pause there and open that up for any type of conversation. If any of you have experienced this or want to elaborate on when you have experienced it, to make sure that I'm not crazy. But I think this is a big point of contention with folks, is that they feel as though the HR and the TA folks are just holding on to that feedback and sitting on it just to make people suffer. And I really want to clear this up, because I hear this over and over and over again. And I can tell you, I have chased feedback for months, literally months, from hiring managers. And it's painful, which is why I created very locked down processes where they wouldn't get any more candidates if they didn't give me feedback in 24 hours. Like there's a lot of pieces that we can control when we have hiring managers who don't agree or who don't follow the process. So anybody want to chime in on that one real quick?
I will, Barbie. It's Suzanne.
Hello.
I know if we haven't met on the call, I'm Suzanne Ricci, and I work a lot with candidates. So I run a computer training center, and with that, we do a lot of coaching on the candidate side. And I think from the candidate perspective, one of the things that they believe, whether this is true or not, but for the most part, candidates believe they don't ever get feedback because of liability.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on that?
Yes, I would agree with that. I'm sorry that slides are going crazy. I'm trying to admit people into the session because for some reason I set it up where I have to admit them. So my bad. Yes. So repeat that, Suzanne.
So from the candidate perspective, I believe a lot of candidates believe they don't get feedback because of liability, not because there is no feedback. And maybe that's a myth that needs to be put out there, that they, candidates just think that they can't be told why they didn't qualify unless they go through a staffing company. It does seem that candidates who go through staffing companies do get feedback on you weren't technical enough, your whatever wasn't up to par, but it does seem like if they're going direct through TA, through corporations, that it's a liability issue. At least that's what candidates think.
Yep. And they're not necessarily wrong. I have worked for organizations that had very, very strict and stringent policies around not providing specifics to candidates when they're being declined. And that stems from companies being sued by candidates because they said, oh, you declined me for this, but that's not true. Or you declined me for this, but X, Y, and Z. So companies tend to look at potential litigation and ways to avoid that. Mm-hmm. There's still a way to decline people without giving them, really minute specific feedback to say, based on your experience, we didn't feel like you were a good fit. Based on this, it didn't seem like you were the best fit possible. there are ways to give feedback, but you are right, Suzanne, that is a real issue out there. And I have worked for several companies that have said our policy is that we do not provide specific decline reasons to candidates. The other side of that is not just litigation, it's also because those conversations can go south very, very quickly. Mm-hmm. And I've experienced this myself as well early in my career of trying to provide someone with feedback as to why they didn't move on in the process. And it became them telling me all the ways in which I was wrong. Sure. And that they simply could not accept the feedback, which is another indicator that they were likely not the right fit anyway because of the way they handle receiving the feedback, right? That's another big red flag. But it's also in an effort to not have our recruiting folks or our TA folks spending an hour and a half going through this decline conversation because that person just simply cannot hear the feedback or accept it. So there can be lots of different reasons why folks don't go down a very detailed path.
Yeah, and I've had that experience myself, right? I'm also a hiring manager running the company, and I completely see both sides. I was just putting out there that that's what job seekers believe. Overwhelmingly, that's what I hear when I'm talking to job seekers, is that they don't hear anything because of liability, not because TA doesn't have the information.
Mm. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because when I read what's out there on LinkedIn, most of the comments are, they just don't care. They don't give you the feedback because they don't care. And that's just disappointing, because I don't believe it's because people don't care. I believe it's either they're not able to, they don't have it, or they're not able to provide specifics.
Right. Hey, Barbie.
Yeah.
This is Angelica. Hi. Hello. So I'm just curious. I mean, I hear a lot of candidates. I'm on the recruiting side, on the agency side. And so a lot of the feedback that I hear from candidates that have interviewed directly with companies and not through a firm, not only do they say they're not getting the feedback, but they just haven't gotten any response from HR. And, you know, it doesn't sound like you've ever operated in that fashion before, but I think even as a recruiter, if I have no feedback, I still want to let the candidate know I don't have any feedback, or they have filled the role and I'm still trying to find out what happened and what the feedback was for you. But I do hear that, like, I didn't hear anything from HR. They haven't responded to me. Or the other side is I've just got an automated response and I went through 6 interviews over 2 months and I got this just thanks, but you know, we didn't go with you type of feedback.
And that happens every day. And I don't believe that that's the right way to handle it. You know, there's a place in my heart for technology. And we, especially large companies, you really have to have an applicant tracking system to manage your candidates and your jobs and your requisitions and all of that. And there's a place for automation where I feel like some HR and TA folks have just gone too far to one side, is that they have removed the candidate experience and the human touches within that process that are meaningful. And I would say that applies to any process within an organization that has become automated that interacts with people, whether it's a customer facing or recruiting facing or what have you, is that if it's not a really well designed process where meaningful contact points are identified, then you get that very robotic experience of, I just gave this company 6 hours of my life over the course of 3 months, and all I get is an email that says thanks but no thanks. So that absolutely does happen. And there's really no defending that. It does, and I don't believe it's the right way to handle it. The folks who really get it will, for legal purposes, that email may need to be sent, right? So that they can say, yes, we declined that person. It's on record. It's in the system. but that recruiter, whomever initiated the relationship with that individual, will also pick up the phone to say, hey, thank you for all the time you gave us, for sharing your experiences. We ended up going with another candidate. Thank you, and we wish you the best, or we're going to keep you in mind as other things come up where you might be a better fit, or whatever the closing might be that's appropriate for that person. But it doesn't happen all the time, and that has to get fixed. So there is no perfect process out there, for sure. I don't believe that it's done maliciously. I believe that some folks have gotten too dependent on technology and forgotten the human touch. And I also know that when recruiters get bogged down with 60 or 80 open requisitions, which we all know happens, and they're not running timely aging reports, and an aging report will show you how long a candidate has been in any particular status. So if somebody's been in a particular status for more than X number of days, that should be a trigger to that recruiter to say, oh my gosh, I need to either close this out or follow up or move them through or what have you. But I have found in my career that not very many organizations actually use aging reports to monitor candidate activity through their pipelines. And that is also a problem, because we can't just let people stay hanging out there forever indefinitely. It's unfair and it's unkind. So I completely understand the frustration people would have in that space. Great questions. Anybody else have anything on that one? Okay. So if I go to my next one, is it going to go to my next slide? Yay. Okay. So one of the other questions I've seen out there is how do you measure whether or not recruiters are successful or they're doing a good job? And there are metrics out there, just like in any department within any organization, there are recruiting metrics. And this is not all of them by any means, but these are some common metrics that we see out there: the candidate experience, the cycle time or the time to fill the job. So that's from the time it was opened until someone starts, how long did it take to fill it? The applicant to hire ratio, how many applications did you receive in order to fill that position? The percentage of jobs filled on time. When you're working in a high volume recruiting scenario, it's very important to know what percentage of positions you're filling by the time those class starts, those start dates happen. What is the candidate quality? Are people staying? Are they the right fit? Are they staying for more than 90 days? Are they leaving in less than 90 days? Are they leaving in less than a year? What does that measure look like? Overall attrition for new hires. If they're in a training scenario, are they leaving during training? Were they not given realistic job expectations? So there's those types of metrics. Offer to acceptance rate, how many phone screens to number of in-person interviews. What is the feedback or the experience of internal stakeholders? So the hiring manager experience. What kind of referrals are you generating from your candidates? So if they had a good experience, have they referred other people to come and interview with the organization? How many applications are you generating per day? So that's a reflection of your sourcing activities. And then the requisition aging. So how long has it been open? Have you had several offers out there and just not able to close it? So there's many, many metrics. I don't know if there's any additional big metrics that you guys can think of that aren't on here that job seekers might find interesting, but this is just a few of what we measure in TA. No? Okay. So it sounds simple, right? Like, that doesn't seem like a terribly convoluted process. However, it's much more complicated, and it's more complicated because it's people. We're not making a widget. It's not a box we're passing down an assembly line. It's people, and we have to rely on multiple people throughout an organization to bring all of this to fruition. And so I outlined just a couple of things that could happen that can delay the process. As I mentioned, the hiring manager fails to gain needed approvals. A requisition actually wasn't approved. I have seen that happen more times than I can even remember. And you're, 3 interviews deep with a candidate and they've come on site only to have to tell them that the job actually doesn't exist. The hiring manager creates unreasonable qualifications for the job and is unyielding. This is something that I know candidates get frustrated with. I know recruiting agencies get frustrated with. Internal HR and TA get just as frustrated with this. I can give you an example. At a company I worked with, we were hiring for warehouse folks. These were folks who would manage product within the warehouse. So not overly complicated, no real significant, sophisticated technical skills. You are reading a list and you are handling materials and putting things from one bin to another. So fairly entry-level position. I'm not kidding you when I say the hiring manager wanted a minimum of a bachelor's degree, a minimum of 5 years of experience within warehouse management, wanted the interview. He wanted the person to interview with 6 different internal people. I mean, the list went on, and the position paid $10 an hour. And the pushback it took to get this hiring manager to move was unbelievable. Like, it took me stepping in as the executive to say, no, we are not doing this. This is ridiculous. And then when we finally did get people in to interview, he interviewed them for 2.5 hours. I mean, just crazy stuff like this happens all the time. And it has nothing to do with TA or HR. It has to do with the hiring manager and the folks who work within that department. And so that's another thing I wanted to put out there to help job seekers understand that oftentimes the job qualifications have nothing, like HR can influence those, but at the end of the day, it's the hiring manager who will often have the last say because it's his or her department. This job reports into them. And there are some organizations out there who have very clear guidelines on some of this. But for the majority of companies, it's not black and white, and there's not that strong hold of this is what our company says, and we don't require degrees for positions under this level or whatever it might be. So I know that is a big issue that I've read a lot of job postings about recently. And typically it says, HR, stop asking for 5 years of experience for a job that pays $8.50 an hour. I get it, but again, it's typically not HR creating those unreasonable qualifications. And they're usually the ones fighting hard to get them to change it. So I wanted to, again, open up this for conversation to see if you guys have any insight on this as well. Because I can see lots of heads nodding.
Barbie,
Barbie.
I've actually,
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. I've already spoken.
Ladies first. Go ahead, Angelica.
Oh, is that you, Orlando?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. No, I think that's really interesting what you say, Barbie, because I've experienced personally the opposite with my clients. In fact, I've had a client recently where the managers are fighting against HR about all of the requirements necessary, whether it's degree, the salary grade, the list of technology skill sets where it looks like it's 3 people in one, to do the job. So my comment is really just interesting, is I found that opposite situation in my experience working with, and usually typically more larger enterprise size companies.
Right.
That's it. I have never in 20 years, ever, or over 20 years, ever had HR hold back a job description or qualifications. And the reason I'm so adamant about that, and I believe you, Angelica, I'm not in any way questioning you.
I know
So
you're
don't
not.
take it that way. But what I would encourage you guys to understand is that hiring managers are using you as the middle person. And they will tell you what you want, what they think you want to hear. And I hate to be that blunt about it, but I have experienced this so many times where they're playing you against HR, trying to get what they want out of it. And at the end of the day, if you're not talking to that HR and TA person directly, you're never going to know. But I have seen it so many times. Orlando,
Barbie.
do you have something?
Yeah, you kind of touched on it a bit, that just in my experience is that hiring managers will request what they want versus what the job requires. So sometimes those expectations are not in line with the salary itself. And I've had some cases where they're actually trying to, which most jobs are like, you try to replace the opening exactly how the last person left it. So with all these additional ad hoc duties that person may have brought to the table and made that role more expand, and they're like, yes, this is what we're looking for. But ideally, there was just that individual having more ammunition in their toolbox, which elevated the role. So now they're like, this is what we're looking for. And it was like, well, if you look at the degree of the position and what it's being compensated for, that's not really what you need. And sometimes I've come across it, like I said, where managers do not want to put in the extra time to train someone up. So they're saying, I need someone coming at this level, this is the salary, and then it causes a conflict there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Barbie, this is Blake. I also think that what Angelica, I think that was it, is that right? Angelica was saying earlier about it being a little bit opposite of what you're saying. I think sometimes that depends on a company's salary administration plan and how they worked out the grade levels, the positions and the grade levels, and they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole sometimes. And I think that's where sometimes the opposite happens, or at least that's been my experience trying to work within salary administration, competencies and structures.
And that's assuming that the company has a salary and compensation structure, right?
Right.
Not every company even has that. And what I've seen happen numerous times is you guys in the recruiting agency space are doing your jobs. You're meeting with the hiring manager, maybe you take that person to lunch, or sometimes you have tickets to a game and they're your client. So you're building that relationship with your client. Please never forget that those hiring managers love those lunches. They love those tickets. They love all of those things that you guys bring to the table because you're bolstering their egos. And I hate to say it that way, and I know it sounds harsh, but I have lived this reality where they will tell you that they have the ability to make these decisions. Oh yeah, I'm going to hire this person. I'm going to pay him this. I'm going to pay him that. Meanwhile, the HR and the TA folks have no idea that you even exist. And they are bound to a preferred vendor list. That's another thing that happens, is
Right.
that hiring managers will backdoor agencies into a company without even going through the formal approval process for vendors. And this sounds ridiculous, but I have had people working at a company that I didn't even know were there because the manager went to an agency because that agency took him to the football game or the hockey game and went to lunch and to dinner and, wined and dined him. They brought in this person. The person never got put on payroll. We didn't know the person was even there. They worked in IT, so IT could get him a computer and get him on the system. HR didn't know anything about it. This person worked for a month, never got paid, never, didn't go through security, nothing happened. We didn't know anything about it because that hiring manager just figured they had the swagger to do whatever they wanted to do. So again, there's all of these different scenarios, and unfortunately, I feel like it puts the recruiting agency people, like it puts you guys in such a difficult position, because you're trying to service your candidates, you're trying to solve the problems that these folks are giving you, but they're not communicating with their HR teams or their TA teams, who ultimately have to answer for this process. And so I would encourage anybody who works for an agency, please make sure you also have a relationship with your HR and TA teams, so that you can check, right? Like, do that check and balance, trust and verify. Oh, I had lunch with John last week. It was great. He told me this, this, and this about this position. Are you guys aligned on that one? Because without that alignment, it's going to cause further frustration.
Abby, it's Steve, and I've been on both sides. I've been in corporate recruiting and agency. I'm on the agency side now. Definitely agree with Orlando on a lot of the positions. They get bigger and bigger, and the scope gets larger and larger due to the fact that the person who was in that role for 20 years took on so many more responsibilities and made the position so impossible to fill that I know it's incredibly hard for you guys on the HR talent side to try to at least talk to them and say, this job kind of morphed into 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah.
Find the right person for that person's team, it becomes almost impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that the second thing I wanted to say is that a lot of hiring managers have never interviewed before. And I know that companies don't train them all the time to interview. So, to interview a warehouse person for 2.5 hours doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And I do think you make great points, Steve. I think 90% of the issues that we deal with that cause this conflict between agencies and in-house HR and TA are solved by a robust, well-defined recruiting process and system with roles and responsibilities and kind of checks and balances. If a process was implemented and everyone was held to that process, how much easier would it be for the agency recruiting folks to say, okay, that's your process, got it. Now I know how to properly introduce candidates to the organization. Now I know who to contact when I have a new candidate to introduce. Now I know how I'm going to receive the jobs, right? So a lot of the fault of the confusion, I believe, falls because the TA teams have not thoroughly and properly defined their own internal process, and therefore made it difficult for you guys to know what you're supposed to do when and when and where, and who is your point of contact, how do you go about doing this, and you're just trying to figure it out as you go. So there's a lot of responsibility that absolutely falls on the shoulders of the HR and the TA folks in creating clarity around all of these issues, both for the job seekers but also for the relationship with the agencies and the headhunting firms. I think that clarity would solve 90% of the conversations that we're even talking about, right? It would fix that. But it takes support at the executive level all the way through the organization to hold those hiring managers to that process. And that's where I think it gets dicey. I have created those processes, and I have trained organizations on proper interviewing, the process, the whole 9 yards. Where it falls apart is that one hiring manager who says, well, I get all that, but I need to do this now. And if the executive of that department doesn't support the process, that's where it all falls apart. And that's the hard part, I think, that the internal folks struggle with, and then it ends up impacting you guys as well. Really great points.
Or just one more thing. I think that also, like when you do that intake call with a company, HR and the hiring manager should both be on the call with the recruiting agency. so that everybody is on the same team and everybody is on the same page.
That's a great point, and I've found that to be very helpful. When you're doing your intake call with your hiring manager, if you're an agency, ask to have the internal TA or HR individual on the call with you or in that meeting. That way they're not able to play one against the other, because it does happen all the time. It really does. I know I sound like a broken record, but it happens all the time. So I wanted to talk about, why do companies use agencies, right? Because a lot of folks don't even understand why agencies exist versus internal TA teams. And this is just a few, but there's many reasons, right? So depending on the size of the organization, they might need additional recruiting support. Many agencies have a niche. So in IT especially, or healthcare, or executive recruiting, or HR recruiting. So sometimes agencies focus on just one type of hiring. So they get really good at that type of hiring. They get really large pipelines of candidates, and they have ongoing relationships with those folks. So they know when a candidate's ready to move on from their current role, and they can very quickly bring forward folks to fill your opening. So there's great reasons to work with agencies for sure. If it's only a temporary position, maybe somebody's going on vacation and you need a receptionist for 2 weeks. It's a great way to, fill that role, is to reach out to an agency who can get that job filled quickly. It can be faster to use an agency to fill open roles in the short term. Ultimately, if that person is someone you want to bring onto your organization as a regular or permanent hire, that person's still going to have to go through the same background check and drug screen. So the process is the same. It's not necessarily shorter, it's just happening at a different time. So it doesn't feel like it takes as long. And scale. If you're opening up a new business in a city where you didn't exist before and you have to hire 5,000 people, well, if you need to scale very quickly, having agency support can help you do that. So those are just a few of the reasons why companies use agencies. And I've seen agencies and internal teams partner, and it's a win-win. It works beautifully when you can get on the same page. And when they don't, everyone loses, especially the job seeker, because they're the ones who either can't interview for the job anymore because they're associated with that agency and that agency is no longer working with that company, or they get frustrated with the organization and it really had nothing to do with the organization. There was a breakdown in communication between HR and the agency. So I feel like if we can help folks understand how to work together, we can help our candidates and the job seekers. If any of you agency folks want to add any other reasons why companies use agencies, happy to have you share that as well. No, did I capture them all? Okay. Most of them anyway. All right. So when we talk about metrics, we listed some of the recruiting metrics that agencies and internal HR and TA teams use. But there's one distinct difference. There's one metric that agencies have that internal TA teams and HR teams do not have, right? It's a fundamental difference between internal and external agencies. Does anybody know what that might be? You know what it is.
Cost.
Money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So agency recruiters get paid when they place someone in a role, or when they get the temp to perm position moving. So that's how agencies make their money. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with agencies making money to place people. It's important we understand that difference though, because I think that is often where, that is the differentiator. Let me put it this way. I believe the differentiator between really reputable recruiting agencies and the folks who are in it just for the dollar, that's where you see a big gap. Recruiting agencies and headhunters who are in it to work and partner with their candidates to help them find the right role for them, to help them with career coaching, to help them with interview training, those folks are in it because they care. And yes, they make money as a result. There's the other side of recruiting that is not so pleasant. And many of you may have worked with those agencies and you no longer work with those agencies. And they're kind of the churn and burn where they hire a lot of college graduates and they put them behind a recruiting desk and a bullpen, and you make 50 calls a day. You make like, it's all about just the numbers to make the money. And that is often where I feel like the candidate loses. Those are the folks who intentionally circumvent process. They are just nasty. I have personally had to intervene on a few of these situations where these recruiters were being so disrespectful to the HR and TA teams and just accusatory and just nasty. And it's because they're in it for the wrong reasons. They're in it because somebody somewhere said you can make a ton of money as a recruiter or as a headhunter. And they have failed to recognize that it's really about people and helping folks in a career. And you're helping folks, especially now, who are in a very vulnerable state. And if all you're looking for is the payoff, then you're in the wrong job. And I don't know if you guys have experienced this yourselves. I know, Carmen, you've been quiet, but I see the smile on your face. You worked for a really large agency, global, and I'm sure you've seen this where you get people who come in and that's all they see are dollar signs, and they typically don't last. They burn out very quickly because they can't sustain it. They're not in it for the right reasons.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was in a position where I was in more of that, what you described. I did get hired right out of college to go work for a healthcare agency, and now working on the other side where we at Wilson, we're not an agency. As a matter of fact, we're recruitment process outsourcing firm and a total talent provider, and we really believe in that partnership and being able to augment the strengths that the internal team has, and understanding their process, helping them with that process and helping them with the metrics they need to succeed. So it truly is about the people and humanizing it, and the candidate experience is everything. And I think just kind of holistically, this whole conversation, we really need to think about the employer brand, right? Because that's ultimately what suffers when the candidate experience suffers is the employment brand.
Yeah.
So thinking about that and taking that approach in everything that we do as partners to help people find their best work life, that's where it's at.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you guys get to see it from a really unique perspective, right? Because you're there helping people define their process, helping them define their metrics, helping them figure out the best way to recruit for that organization. So you kind of come in and you see how broken much of it already is, and then how great it can be once they get the support and the processes in place and the systems in place. And that whole transition is really eye-opening, because a lot of organizations don't have the benefit of working with companies like Wilson to help them figure those things out. So it's a wonderful thing when you can see that. But you're spot on. Everything we've talked about so far is wrapped around candidate experience and impacts that. And we talk about employer branding and culture, and it's not really the focal point of this, but in other sessions that I've facilitated, if you've been in any of them, you've heard me say culture lives in every conversation, every email, every touch point with a candidate or with an employee. That's where your culture is. It's the emotional connection they feel to the organization. It's not the words on the wall. It's not the packet they get at orientation. It's every single interaction they have with that company and every person within that company. So yeah, you're all over it, Carmen, that's for sure. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so here we go. Now it doesn't want to forward for me again. All right, so if folks I've had folks ask me this: how are agencies paid? There's so many different ways agencies can be paid. Billable hours. So if they're placing temp help, it's billable hours. Or if they're placing temp to perm, billable hours. There could be a flat placement fee per person. It could be a percentage of the annual salary of the person they're placing. It could be a percentage of that person's total compensation. So that could include their base salary, their bonus potential, their benefits. Like total comp incorporates everything that that company pays for that person. Or they could be on retainer, where it's just a retainer fee, or it could be any combination of those things. So every contract with an agency and a company is different, and it depends on what they've agreed to, but those are some ways agencies are paid. I just wanted to clarify that for folks, because I don't know that candidates always recognize that there is a financial transaction that happens with placement. And it's important that they do understand that, because oftentimes that can cloud what actually happens in those relationships. So it's important for people to know. So where all this started was the blame game, and things I continue to see both on LinkedIn and some other social media spaces is HR is not your friend. Don't believe HR. They're there to keep you from getting in the door, that they will lie to you, they will block you. ATS systems are made to keep you from getting in the door, and ATS systems are made to screen out. And I've seen screen out people of color, people over 40, people this, people that. And I can tell you, in all of my years of experience, I have never once implemented an ATS system with the intention of screening people out of anything, right? ATS systems are there to help identify the people who are a job fit, who have the right qualifications. But they're certainly not there and structured to screen out people based on any EEOC data. That would be the very easiest way to get a company sued and shut down. So I am sure that they're not set up that way. I don't even think you can set them up that way, frankly. I don't think ATS systems would even allow you to select age as a criteria. But people believe it because somebody somewhere told them that. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that those things are not true. Those things do not happen that way. I don't know why my screen keeps forwarding the wrong way. These are things I've heard about agencies, that all recruiting agencies are bad. Agencies don't care about candidates. They just care about the money. Agencies will lie or do whatever it takes to land the placement. Agencies will steal your candidates. I don't believe that's true either. It's not an all or none, right? There are some people who are not going to behave well. There are some people who are not going to be honest, but I don't think that there's an HR or TA team out there with the intention of lying about candidates or to agencies. And I also don't believe that there are agencies out there with the intention of lying and stealing and not caring about people. So it's all these perceptions that are created, and perhaps it just seems to escalate because social media creates the perfect opportunity for people just to throw things out there into the world behind this veil of a computer and an attack. And I can tell you, I have personally been attacked by an individual recruiter. She works for herself, and she was putting some really, really ugly things out there. And this was about 8 months ago. And I respectfully challenged her and said, I have to understand where this is coming from, because as the CHRO, as somebody who's been in this for over 20 years, and I've hired over 50,000 people in my career. I've done tremendous volume recruiting. I've done executive recruiting. Not one of these things that you're posting on here reads true to me. And she lashed out at me like nothing I have ever seen, and that I sit in my ivory tower, and how would I know? And I make my 7 figures a year and all this stuff. And I'm like, lady, I wish I was making 7 figures a year. Let's be real. But when I responded to her, her response was just to delete everything I had said and block me. And I've since found that anyone who challenges her, she deletes and blocks. And I find that it's folks like that who are perpetuating these perceptions one way or the other. And those of us who have a voice, we need to use it, because that's the only way we're going to get the job seekers to understand what's real and where they can go for help and support to find the jobs they need, and what's real in all of this and what isn't. So I wanted to open this up to conversation of, you know, what are you guys hearing out there that you want to clear up or clarify, that you don't believe is true, whether it's on the HR and TA side or the agency side?
I think one of the big problems is that a lot of, somebody has a bad experience and they just make a blanket statement that all of HR stinks or all agency recruiters suck. And it's just that one experience that ruins it for them. And yes, I'm not saying that there aren't bad people in both of these industries, but that doesn't mean that everybody in those industries are harmful. And I think that needs to get fixed. You know, I'm like, yes, you had a bad experience and I'm sorry about that, but don't make it a blanket statement that all those people suck.
Yeah. You're spot on, Steve. And I think it's us intentionally making those clarifications for people, and intentionally, you know, using our voices to help folks understand. That sounds like, you know, I'm disappointed that happened to you. I'm really sorry that you went through that experience. I've seen it work in different ways. Have you worked with this agency before? Have you ever worked with this recruiter before? Have you ever, you know, and giving people the other side of it or other options may help them and help them through it. Because and especially now with so many people unemployed. And I want to say, you know, in our society right now, there's so much division, and it feels as though no matter what's happening, someone is always to blame. We're always looking for someone to blame, no matter who you are, right? If you're an HR, right, or a TA, or if you're in an agent, everybody's looking for somebody to blame. And the reality is sometimes people just make mistakes, right? Sometimes you didn't get interview feedback because it just fell off somebody's radar, or they're overwhelmed, or maybe the email they sent you bounced back. I've had that happen. There's so many other things, but we immediately go to, I'm going to blame them because, instead of seeking to understand. And I think we all have to approach it from that lens of let's try to figure out how we can make it better, instead of just assuming that people are out to get us, because I just fail to believe anybody is really out to get any of us. That's me. Maybe I'm Pollyanna, but I just don't believe that. Suzanne, you took yourself off mute. Did you want to add something?
I did. I think when it comes to LinkedIn in particular, and that particular recruiter who I think I know which one it is, you have to, I mean, you really have to look at why are they posting that type of content? Like, how are they, like, she's running a business, and I think that that's part of the shock jock type of appeal that, you know, to get people to follow, to get people to, you know, convert into whatever it is. I don't know if she sells a program or what she does, but I think that, you know, as individuals who are on social media, whether that's personal or professional, we need to make sure that we are looking at those types of things. Mm-hmm. You know, her blocking you, I would say, is probably because she doesn't want you interfering with her revenue stream. And I think it comes down to people understanding just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true or real, right?
Yes. Preach, Dan. No, you're right. And I do think that in the age of social media, especially with everybody, you know, isolating and quarantining and social distancing, that it is the shock value. It's how many followers can I get? Because if I get more followers, then potentially I'll get more placements. That means more money in my pocket. And right. So by being divisive, that's that particular individual's game plan. It's not sustainable. It's simply not. People are going to figure it out at a point in time. And it's just, I've never seen anyone actually build a long-term business that's profitable and positive over time with that approach. I have not.
I agree with you. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying she's right because I've read.
Oh, no, I know.
Make my jaw drop. But I think that we have to just say, well, you know what? That's always going to happen because there's money to be made and she's found a way. So.
Well, and I agree with you. Here's what I find disappointing in that particular interaction and a few others, believe it or not. I can't sit there quietly. It's just not in me to just let it happen over and over and over and over again. That's just not who I am. I'm always respectful with my pushback, but I have to put it out there. And what I find the most interesting is whenever I do, I am flooded with private messages from people saying, thank you. It's about time somebody said something. Nobody ever stands up. Nobody does. And I want to say, why didn't you say something? Like, why are we not using our voices? We all have them. And it's okay to push back on people when you do it with respect and when you do it for the right reasons. And it's just astounding to me that everybody just kind of sits back and waits for somebody else to carry the torch, somebody else to step in. And we can't do that. We've got to step up. Otherwise, it just perpetuates these perceptions that are just not true on either side, on either side. So it's not all one way or the other.
Barbie, I just want to hop in real quick. And one of my missions for 2020 has been to try to limit the amount of influence a lot of these LinkedIn influencers have, because I think a lot of what they peddle is fear, right? They like to point blame. It's a lot easier to build a following, and like, you won't be surprised that like one of them has like a pyramid scheme underneath her. Like it almost makes sense, like why, you like and share it, and they want you to continue to follow and make them go viral. I think for a lot of them, it's a lot easier to point blame at everybody else but themselves, right? For them, it's, HR or an agency should respond to every single person that applies with very detailed feedback. And then if you push back on what that looks like, it's like, well, then you're lazy, or then you're not good at your job, or you don't care about candidates. It's like, well, no, it's not that. I think a lot of what happens is a lot of posts say, hey, just apply for any job that you think that you're like even remotely qualified for. And then, you have, job postings that get 600 applicants in 12 hours. And then all of a sudden it's, now I have to go through all of these, and the expectation now, because like LinkedIn has pushed these people to say, hey, you need to get feedback to every single one. It needs to be detailed. You need to tell them why they didn't get the job, or you need to interview everybody because everybody's more than a resume. It's like, it's so much easier to blame HR, and it's so much easier to blame agencies. The more that our industry just kind of as a collective whole stands up and say, hey, this is what our process does do, right? And that's why I love this presentation. This is what the process is. This is how we go through a process. And this is ultimately how a person ends up in a job. They'll realize like, hey, HR, agencies, et cetera, we're all there to help facilitate people getting a job, not to just stand in the way. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Dan, because ultimately we all have metrics. And this is the one thing I've never understood is, where in there is anyone in HR or TA or an agency incentivized by blocking people? None of us are. None of us are incentivized to block anyone. Our jobs are to find the best candidates and the best fit for the jobs that we can. And nowhere in that is an incentive to block anyone from the opportunity if they're qualified. It just doesn't make sense to me. So great point. Thank you for sharing that. So we need to work together, right? Agencies are great for job seekers. There's so many benefits to working with agencies if you are a job seeker. And I want to put this out there because I think there's a perception that, HR and TA, we don't like agencies. And I want to put it out there. That's not true. We do. And when we can partner together, it's a great relationship. Agencies are great for job seekers because they can help introduce you to an organization where they have a long-standing relationship. They can help you understand the culture of an organization or the culture of the department within the organization. Because what a lot of job seekers may not understand is that there's a corporate culture, and you're going to get an introduction to that on the company's website, right? That's what you're going to see their company mission and values and all of that stuff that they put out there, the window dressing. And I hate to say it that way, but that's often, it's what they aspire to be. And we all do that. We all have aspirational goals of culture and mission and values. But when an agency has worked with a particular company over time, they can help you understand how that culture actually comes to life within that company or within that department, because each department has their own nuances and their own culture within that organization. So a recruiter or an agency who's worked with that company for a long time can really give you insight that you wouldn't get elsewhere. So there's a big benefit there. And I also think that agencies know and often have their finger on the pulse of job openings before they're posted externally, because they do have those relationships, and maybe they have had a conversation with someone last week where they know that, you know, there's going to be an opening a month from now. And while it's not even out there posted yet, but that agency kind of has the inside scoop on what's getting ready to open up down the line. So there's great advantages for building relationships with recruiters and recruiting agencies, even if they don't have anything available for you right now. Building that relationship, getting to know them, letting them know what your ideal job is and what skills and experiences you bring to the table can really help that job seeker in the long run. Anything else you guys would like to add for job seekers around, you know, benefits of working in partnership with an agency? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one.
Hey, Barbie. So one of the things that I do now when I do talks as well is educating, and you covered this, the difference between corporate and agency recruiting, but also letting folks know that they should partner not just with one agency, though you do your vetting process. But I see a lot of frustration from the candidates because they put all their eggs in an agency, and it's like, don't ever do that, right? Because they can't guarantee the role. And one of the things I specifically do is that recruiters don't create the jobs, we create the partnerships, right? Or the connections. So it's, yes, use a recruiting agency as your marketing and public relations team. It's totally free to you, but at the same time, develop your own job search plan. And just from speaking with folks, they do put a lot of emphasis on the recruiting agencies to hopefully make their process that much smoother because of everything you said. We have the relationships, you know, there's that deep dive and culture understanding. The process is simple. And I think job seekers need to be educated more is to let them folks know they're not the end all be all. They're one source, one phenomenal source, but they're only one source. So you just need to add to your repertoire of job searching and not just lean solely on an agency recruiter to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a good point.
Yeah, Barbie, I would also add in there, that's a great point. I always tell when candidates come into our office to always work with, at least 2 or 3 agencies, because despite, what my relationships are, they only go so far, right? So oftentimes we would say, hey, go reach out to, Angelica and that group over there at Lucas Group, or, Ryan and My Source and a couple of the others out there, just because, at the end of the day, I'm here, hopefully, for the rest of my life here in Tampa in the tech industry. So I want, folks that are here to stay here, right? I don't want them to move to Raleigh or Nashville or Phoenix or wherever. So I want them to stay here because at the end of the day, these relationships hopefully aren't going to be, a one and done transactional experience. I know we're going to talk a little bit, more about that in the future. So, for any job seeker, certainly working with at least 2 or 3 agencies. But I would say, even on top of that, one of the things that I think that agencies can be good for job seekers is letting you know about opportunities or companies that you may not know about, right? As a job seeker, I know that, something that we do, and I know something that, a lot of the other firms in the area will do is, within reason, we'll candidate market, right? If we get a great candidate that we know fits the culture of a particular company, we're going to reach out to that company on your behalf, right? Obviously there's an added bonus for us if it all works out. But, at the end of the day, because like you said, we do understand a lot about culture. And if, we've had a long-standing relationship, understand, maybe their technology or their process or procedure that they do things, there might be, certainly an opportunity that a candidate did not know exists or certainly might not be posted online.
Yeah, that's a great call out. And some companies, especially smaller companies, they may solely rely on agencies to fill 100% of their openings. So their job openings might not even be posted out there on Indeed or LinkedIn or some of these job boards. So I always encourage folks to have relationships with agencies. And another point is I would make sure that job seekers have relationships with agencies that are really have a good stronghold in a certain geography, but also that have connections nationally or internationally, especially with the way work is now moving more and more and more remote. So in the past, you would go, if you were moving to Tampa from somewhere else, you may want to establish a relationship with an agency in Tampa. Well, I would encourage folks, yes, you want to do that, but you also want to make sure that you're working with folks who understand some things that might be happening in other areas, because there's more and more remote positions opening up. So there could be a position for a company based in New York that you can sit in Tampa and do the job. But a Tampa agency might not know it, but they may have a relationship with an agency in New York that does. So whether it's a national or an international agency, or just that recruiting group has those connections in other markets, it's really important to ask some of those questions, which, as Dan referred to, we are going to talk about some things, some tips for job seekers on how to build their networks a little bit. All right, so let's forward. So reasons why I have seen agencies are great for employers, as we talked about. They can help you ramp up quickly, fill a temp role, partnering to understand the market. This is one thing we didn't really talk about, is if you are new to a certain geography, if you are new to your role, and maybe you don't have a full understanding of what the compensation looks like in that market, agencies are really great for helping you figure that out. They're going to tell you the average comp rate for a customer service representative in this market is this when you're looking at these, fundamental skills. So agencies can really help give you data and insight and an understanding of what the market can provide. So that's another great reason why I believe employers should have relationships with agencies. Even if they don't use them all the time, they have that relationship there so that they can leverage them when they need them and make sure that their data is accurate. And then this is another benefit that I have found, and I don't know if you guys realize that you do this or not, but agencies can help companies understand their reputation in the market. And I know it's a delicate balance that when you have a client reach out to you with a new position to fill, you really want to fill that job, and you want to be very tactful in giving them feedback. But it's very helpful when you say to that person, I would love to help you fill this job, but your company's reputation in the market really sucks. Right? And here's why. Here's what I'm hearing. I've gotten this feedback from X number of candidates that I've sent to your organization, or I've gotten this feedback from people who used to work at your company. Are you aware that this is what's happening? This is what's being said about your organization out there? Because sometimes you become so insulated, you don't realize it. So having those trusted relationships with agency folks, they can really help you understand how people are perceiving your organization in that particular market. I don't know if any of you guys have had those experiences or not of having to give that feedback to organizations, but I have been in that seat before years ago. So questions for job seekers. So if you're looking for a job right now, and you want to work with an agency, or maybe you have a couple of agencies you've gone into, here's some questions that we would recommend you ask the recruiter you're working with, you would ask of that agency, because you want to make sure that you're aligning yourself with an agency that is reflective of your personal values, things that you hold important, that the agency is skilled and understands the type of work you do, and that they have the right relationships to help you find the right job for you. Because it's not a one size fits all. Not every agency is equal. Not every agency has this specialty in your particular area. So some questions that you might ask when you're considering working with an agency is, how long have you been in business or been in business in this market? Who are your largest clients? That's a great question to ask. Do they specialize in small companies? Do they specialize in, global organizations? What does their client look like? What does their ideal target client look like? And then how many candidates have they placed with those best clients? And then what type of roles are they best at filling? There are some great IT firms out there. You might not go to an IT recruiting firm if you're looking for a job in marketing or HR. They're likely not going to have those relationships. But and in the same vein, if you're a highly skilled IT professional, going to a recruiting firm that specializes in HR is not going to serve you well. So really understanding what that agency does and what their specialty area is very, very helpful. And I don't know that job seekers, I know the IT job seekers get it, because that's their mindsets. They know they're used to working with agencies. But outside of those specific skill sets of IT, I don't know that a lot of folks realize that not all agencies are the same, and they don't all fill the same types of jobs. What other questions would you recommend job seekers ask when they're considering working with an agency?
I'm sorry to jump in, but that's a major point you just pointed out, Barbie, because if the job seeker doesn't know the specialty of the agency, and then the agency doesn't come clean and say, yes, no, we don't specialize in X, industry, versus they see they're a quality candidate, take them on, but can't produce nothing because they have no relationships in that industry. And then that candidate gets frustrated because there's lack of communication, lack of progress. So I think that's definitely a two-way street, to where the candidate needs to know for sure, and the agency just needs to be honest and be like, hey, we don't specialize in X field. Here is, go to X, go to Angelica, go to Dan, and they're more suited for what you're looking for. That's a great point, though.
Awesome. Suzanne or Dan, do you guys have anything you would add to that? Questions for job seekers to ask of an agency?
Well, after this conversation, I think they need to ask if they speak to the hiring manager and to the TA team, right?
Yeah.
That's really great. That's a great question. I should have added that on here. My goodness. You got me.
When was the last time you went to lunch with them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Or
I mean,
how
I think
long
that,
has it been since you placed someone
It's
there?
going to be since
Right.
February at this point.
and what is your relationship, or what is your contact to them? Are you submitting blindly into a portal, right? Because that can help set expectations. I think at the end of the day, this whole thing goes into managing and setting expectations with both candidates. I think that happens on the HR to agency side, the agency to HR side. I think this whole process is about setting expectations. So are you blindly submitting into a portal with 36 other vendors, which is okay. I need to let you know, or you need to know as a candidate, hey, this is, kind of where I fit in there. But I think a lot of it is, what is your relationship like? How did you build your relationship, with them? What can you tell me about the company, right? What are some of the nuanced things that, you who spent, all this time, effort, energy, and money in building a relationship that I can't find on Google or on their website? What can you tell me about, candidates that haven't worked out before there, right? Because if somebody says, hey, we've placed somebody at, this company 60 times and all 60, have worked out and they're all, happy-go-lucky now, they're lying to you, right? So why didn't people work out, right? I think that those are the questions that, we need to be forthright and honest, as, agencies to, candidates, and then candidates definitely need to ask that to agencies that they're working with as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that job seekers need to understand that they have a role to play in this by taking ownership of the process. And they need to be interviewing agencies and companies just as much as they're being interviewed. Even in a market right now where everything has gone sideways and there's, you know, millions of people out of work, you still want to know what you're getting into and why and what's happening behind the scenes as much as you can. So other questions for job seekers for the talent acquisition and the HR folks. So whether you were submitted to that job through an agency or whether you went through their ATS and you are interviewing with them on your own, here's some questions I would highly recommend you write them down. And you may not ask all of them. That's totally fine. I wouldn't imagine you would ask all of them to everyone. But this gives you some questions to ask, because at the end of every interview, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be asked as the candidate, do you have any questions for me? And when you say no, that is a red flag. It is a red flag to the person who is interviewing you, because they want to know what you're thinking. They want to know how curious you are. They want to know how invested you are in this process. So here's some questions that I would love it if somebody asked me and I had just interviewed them. Why is the role open? If it was vacated by someone else, why did they leave? Job seekers don't necessarily understand that they can ask those questions. It's okay. It is absolutely okay. I would want to know why that job was vacated. Did the person fail to perform? If so, while not disclosing any confidential information, can you share with me what was the failure? Was it a project? Was it that they couldn't learn the systems? Or if it was a personal issue, okay, good, hands off, none of my business. So, you know, it's okay to ask. What company values are the most lived within this organization? That's going to give you some insight into the way that person thinks the culture of that organization is going, right? If there's 10 company values on the wall and they tell you 2, I'd ask, why do you think those other 8 aren't on your list of most lived values? What's the disconnect there, right? Because ideally the answer would be all of them, but that's usually not the answer you're going to get. You're going to get an answer of a few of them. So it's, again, it's giving you as the job seeker insight into that organization, into that culture. What are the unspoken cultural norms here? Every one of us on this call right now and who has ever taken a job at a company knows what I'm talking about, because we have our posted culture, values, mission statements, but then there's all the things you learn the hard way once you start working there. What are the questions you don't ask? Who's the person you don't approach in the hallway? What is the hot button of the CEO that you never want to bring up in a town hall meeting, right? What are the unspoken cultural norms within this organization? And see what people tell you. What is the #1 reason people leave the organization? It's another great question to ask, and your HR and TA folks should know that answer. Now they'll probably say other or personal, because that's what most people give you, but you can ask the question. Conversely, why do people stay? Why do people love working here? What's the #1 thing you hear about why people love working here? How does this organization stay in touch with its people? And, you know, what has been the biggest change you have seen since working for this company? Each one of those questions is going to give you a lot of insight into the organization and how that HR person feels about that organization. Questions you may ask the hiring manager. So if you're being interviewed and this is the person you would be reporting to, again, I would ask the same question of this person. Why is the role open? If it was vacated, why did they leave? And if it's a new role, why was it created? I would encourage you to ask that question of everybody you interview with to see if you're getting a consistent response. It's very important to find out if everybody's on the same page about why that role is open. As a leader of this team, what are you most proud of? What does success in this role look like to you? If I'm your employee, how do I know if I'm doing a good job or if I'm off the mark? As a leader, how do you connect with the individuals on your team? Which one of the company values is your favorite and why? again, as the job seeker, I want to learn as much about this person who could be my boss as possible. And this might be my one shot to do it. So I want to ask questions of this person to learn what they find valuable, what's important to them, just as much as they're asking me the same types of questions. So those, I think, are some great insightful questions. Do you guys have any other suggestions you would recommend job seekers ask of potential hiring manager, new boss? Yeah. Okay, cool. All right.
Barbie, on that last question,
Yeah.
As a hiring manager in the past, the one question I want them to always ask me is, what's the hottest thing I've got to fix? If I'm going into a job interview, I'm going to ask the hiring manager, bottom line, what do you need me to fix in the first 30 days when I come in this door? What's your hot button on this particular project or the position? And at that time, that's also what I'm looking for the guy to ask me. I want to know if he wants to know what to fix, what to come in here. Is he going to be prepared to come in and do the job, or am I going to have to spoon feed him?
Yep. No, that's a great point, Philip. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think where it's an individual contributor role or it's a unique position, that is a great question. Where that question may not give you a ton of feedback is if you're going into a role as a customer service representative and you're one of 600 customer service representatives and you ask, what problem do you want me to solve or to fix? Their answer might be, well, we want you to provide the best customer experience possible. That's a little more vague, but that really is the core of the job, right? But
right,
your
yeah,
point
I come
is
from a very specialized industry, so
right. But if you're hiring a human resources manager or a programmer or whatever, an insurance salesperson, like there's so many jobs where your question is 100% spot on. What are you hiring this role to fix? What's broken? What are you looking at me to do for you is a great question to ask. Absolutely. Awesome. Is there anything else before we get to the thank you slide that we didn't cover that you guys would like to talk about or bring up or has been on your mind, or questions, concerns, observations, anything like that?
I do have one regarding recruiters.
Yeah.
Okay. And how to, I'm trying to get the mindset of a recruiter, because in my position, I'm not C-level, but I'm managing director, VP, that kind of level. And I'm normally approached. This is the first time in probably 35 years I've been out here actually having to seek a job that I haven't been approached from one company to go somewhere else. And with this, I'm trying to get a real good feel of the market and how you guys are working, and especially recruiters, because they're going to my LinkedIn site and they'll contact me, or somebody will give them my name and they'll contact me. And once they'll do that, and then we'll go through the typical and do an NDA on it, and then forward them a resume. And then I hear nothing from them. So I mean, giving them a week or so, they got the specific job they're trying to fill, and that's fine. They're looking at what we have on you. Sounds great. Send me a resume. Here's an NDA. Sign that, and then I'll back. Okay. They'll actually go and use with an NDA and tell me the company and what's going on, and then I hear nothing back from them at all. And I give them 3 to 5 days, just a courtesy gap, to ask them a nice email back. What's going on with this position? I mean, I spent 2 days tailoring a resume to the job and the research I just did on a company on the fly and really fast to put this together. And my time and effort is worth the same as yours. Mm-hmm. And the truth of the matter is, a simple response back, it didn't fit company culture. It doesn't fit. They went with their direction. Anything would be responsive, but they ghost you. And I hate that term lately, but they ghost you at this point. And they contacted me. I mean, I get it if I sent a resume into something on the internet. There's a VP job on the internet and I sent a resume in there. First of all, there's going to be 600 resumes going for a position. And I don't expect anyone to contact me back that unless you're going to get into the process. And that's another one. Once you're in that process, all of a sudden you get ghosted, because that should be narrowed down. If you're hiring and you've narrowed it down to the 10 or 50, whatever it is, 15 you're going to actually talk to, at that point, I deserve an answer back.
Mhm.
I mean, not ever hearing or not letting it go. I'm putting a calendar on hold. I'm adjusting things to do this. Yes, I'm working in another direction, but still at the same time, I put the effort in. You contacted me, and I just simply am asking, what's the next step? You know, why don't I get a reply back that simply says, at this point, they're not, didn't like it, you know, you stink, I don't care. You know, anything, but a simple response take me off. And now 3 weeks later, I'm still sitting out here. I don't know if that job's going to pop up in the window and if I want to stick with it or I want to continue in another direction. So it kind of puts us on hold. And I realize you have a lot of people in today's world, everybody's very busy, but with the group that you're actually already contacting, that's got to be a small enough number. You could take 5 seconds and drop an email or a notification.
I'll give you my response and then I'd love to hear from other folks. But if that's happening to you from a TA or an HR team, one, that's really bad form and it's not okay at all. So I would not make an excuse as to why anybody would ghost anybody, especially now, because again, we're in a situation where people are feeling very vulnerable and folks need to have communication. The other side of that is I would say to you, Philip, and I would say this to anybody, and it doesn't make their behavior okay. But if you're not hearing back, assume you are not moving forward in the process. And if they do then reach out to you 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, and you happen to still be available, the first thing I would do is say, it's really interesting to hear from you. I've reached out to you a few times. I haven't heard back. I assumed I was no longer in the process. Why are you contacting me now? Did somebody else fail and I'm your second or third choice? Or did you go on vacation and you just forgot? Or what happened? Because not hearing back from you doesn't work for me. So it's okay to hold people accountable for their bad behavior. Now, if you're being approached by agencies and not hearing back, it could be because they're sending out massive amounts of emails through Messenger on LinkedIn, and they're just trying to get as many folks in their pipeline as possible who may or may not fit. But I would say the same thing applies. If you don't hear back, it's likely because they're moving forward with other candidates. And some folks use that as a tactic, not a tactic, but I'm not going to decline you because if my top 2 or 3 fall out, I still want to keep you in the wings. So I don't want to decline you. And they think that you're still engaged, right? So I've seen that happen. Doesn't make it okay. It absolutely doesn't make it okay. And one thing you could do on the very front end when you're approached is set expectations. I think Dan said this earlier. Set expectations, say, hey, I'm really glad you reached out to me for this position. Unfortunately, recently I've had this happen numerous times and I didn't hear back. I don't want to go through that again. While I'm interested in learning more, I want to know your process and what is your commitment to responding to me in a timely manner, because I will respond to you in a timely manner. And if we can make that agreement now, then let's move forward in the conversation, right? Again, it's okay to hold them accountable to treating you well.
Oh, and this is for some weird reason. Now, I don't know. I was trying to decide, is it because of the volume of people out there today with the circumstances? Because quite frankly, this is like the 3rd time in the last 6 weeks this has occurred. And now the minute they get my information, they no longer want to talk to me. And when American released us all, they put us with Lee Hatch Harrison. And so my gal was great. She went out and did background, making sure there's nothing out there that somebody would stumble on and that I don't know is floating on the internet or something that might come back to hurt you. So I already know that the research would be clean. I just found it quite unusual at that point, because at this point, these 3, you say, yeah, they may reach out to me in 3 weeks or whatever, a month, because this job, maybe it's slow. Maybe they decide to get 100 people. Maybe the top candidate fell out. I'm not going to be apt to want to work with them.
Exactly.
If they've ghosted me like this and they've treated me like this, then you come back to me in 3, 4, 5 weeks after I've tried very politely, gave it time, nice emails, professionally trying to reach you, and you just ignore me. I'm not really going to want to work with you, and I'm not apt to send you any of recommendations of my friends, because in the past, I tend to work with my recruiters. I tend to work on them. If I'm not a fit for your job and you're looking, give me a call. I've been in my business for almost 40 years. Believe me, at this point of what I do and where I'm at, I can probably, especially now with so many people out of work, recommend several people that would love to talk to you that would be good quality candidates to research. I kind of look at it as a two-way street between myself and a recruiter to set up a relationship. So
Absolutely.
I'm not real apt to want to work with these guys now. And quite frankly, I'm not going to mention names, but their names you're going to know.
Yeah, no, I believe it. I believe it. And it's not uncommon, Philip. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon. I've heard this a lot, and I've experienced it. I've been approached by recruiters, and they're, hot and heavy to talk to you, and they do a screen, and they're going to submit you, and then you don't hear anything back. It does happen. There's no reason or excuse that makes it okay. It's bad form. It really just is bad form.
Barbie, can I just comment on that for a minute? And maybe Dan can, there's just some comments going on in the chat that I just want to bring up that my understanding, and this is where Dan can help us out, is it's not common for agencies to not tell you where they're submitting you to. And that's something that if you have to be comfortable with that, right? I know right now there are currently some offshore agencies that job seekers get contacted by, and then they'll have to sign non-disclosures, and they're just sending them out without telling candidates where they're sending them to. But there's a question, so maybe Dan can chime in about one, sharing resumes or CVs if agencies share, which in my knowledge, agencies don't usually share resumes of other candidates with other agencies.
Yeah, no. Oh, go ahead.
And I was going to say, if you want to talk to the point of when you don't know the company that you're being submitted to.
Yeah. So first, Suzanne, that's a great question. And it's also hard to believe I've known you for like 6 years. So to answer your question, I think that goes back a little bit to kind of expectation setting at the beginning. Barbie mentioned it as well, but what should be my expectation in terms of timeline? What is your relationship with this client? Are we trying to farm for a good candidate to submit over and try to get our foot in the door, right? I mean, that's certainly a practice that I don't recommend, but certainly happens, unfortunately, in our business. So I would go back and I would certainly ask, but recruiters just, we do need to be held accountable, right? I mean, this is your job search, and we are, putting your name, on the line as well. So I do think that you need to make sure that you set that expectation up front and that you do hold them accountable. But to answer the question that was in the chat, there's going to be a lot of recruiters that do reach out that will try to, I don't know if they try to blindly do it, but I definitely know that it is a practice where companies will try to, get resumes, and then they'll either submit them without your knowledge, or they will just say, hey, we've got some clients who'd love to share your resume. I'll say this. You're the one that's in charge of your job search. No matter if you're working with an agency or not, you're the one that's in charge of your job search. So despite the fact that, they may have good intentions, don't let candidates or agencies submit your resume without your permission of who they are, what the position's for. Sometimes we talked about it before. It might be, hey, I think that you might be a really good fit for, Acme Widget Company. They hire a lot of, marketing people that have experience with HubSpot. I'd love to recommend you. I'm not going to submit your resume over, and this is kind of how my conversation will go. We're not going to submit your resume over, but we might talk a little bit about you and some of the details that you've done. Would you be okay with that? So those are things that I recommend on the agency side, but don't let companies ever submit your resume without your consent and your knowledge. And the biggest reason is because if a company or an agency sends your resume to a client, there's these right to represent rules and all these, weird mumbo jumbo about now that firm may be the only firm that can represent you to that job for maybe 3 months, 6 months. Sometimes it's up to a year. So always ask and always get, consent before you ever formally get submitted for a job.
Right. I'll make it very plain and clear up front that my resume is only to be submitted to the company we're discussing on this non-disclosure.
Right.
I've got an NDA. This is the company you're advertising and you're marketing for, and that's it. You do not move my resume without my permission to anyone else. And I actually put that, quite frankly, I make them mad. I think I typed it across the bottom of the NDA.
Good. Well, and those are the things that you need to do to make sure that you're protected, because again, this is your job search. Despite agencies being there and being agents, if you will, on your behalf, you need to make sure that you always, and I'm glad that you did and said that, Philip, you need to always make sure that you're the one in control of your job search. So that means having job descriptions, you know, as often as you can, and kind of having a formalized understanding of where are we at in this process. Is this a new position? Has this position been open, you know, 6 times in the last 2 years? Has this position been open for 6 months? Do they really want to fill it, right? Like, these are all questions that, you know, if a recruiter that you're talking to can't answer, then I would be skeptical or weary, and certainly have maybe an elevated eyebrow.
Thank you. To that, I always coach my candidates that one, it should be the NDAs or the representation letters should be for that one company, but make sure it also has a very short time frame. So I tell my candidates 3 months, because that should be long enough for them to get you in, get the interviewing going, and then if you want to extend it, you can, but you don't ever want it to be something that's like 12 months or something, because if another job comes that you're also qualified for, that representation letter could be the reason why you aren't selected for that particular new position.
I would also add,
statement. Thank you.
I would just add in, there are some recruiters, again, that this is a bad practice. There's no doubt about that, Philip, but there's been cases that I've experienced to where we've divulged the company too soon, and then we submit and come to find out the candidate submitted an hour or two prior to us, and then that blocked us. So there may be some fear still out there, like, hey, if I let this person know too soon, because we already know that they're an active and aggressive job searcher, and they can get this job probably on their own. So I want to be careful. So, but to everyone's point, and Dan's point, and to Suzanne's point, make that known. Like, look, let's walk through, because I might have already submitted it to them, and I don't want you to look bad for your client. So let's walk through. If you know you're going to submit me, let's walk through some companies that I've already, you know, submitted to, or that you're looking at. Yeah. So this way everything's on the up and up in transparency. But yeah, there is some fear on the recruiter side that the candidate could submit just as fast at 1 o'clock. They submit at 3, and the HR person's like, we already got this resume, so we're not going to go through you for this.
Yeah.
Just that side of it.
And I think that's a really good point, Orlando. And a lot of job seekers don't understand that that submittal guideline. So I want to clarify that. So if an agency submits your name, your resume to an organization, depending on the contract that agency has with that company, you might be, for lack of a better phrase, owned by that agency for a period of time with regard to that organization. So perhaps they submit you for a customer service position, and 3 months down the line, a marketing position becomes open, and you're more qualified for that marketing position than you were for the customer service position. Depending on how that contract reads, the company might make the decision not to use agencies to fill that marketing role. And if that's the case, then you will not be considered for that role, because the company may not have it in their budget to pay an agency fee to place that job. And because you were submitted by an agency 3 months before, you're out of the running, even if you're the most qualified person. So everyone has made a very, very good point, is to understand where your resume is being submitted through that agency, and it's a fair question to ask. What are your terms with the company? If something comes available, is it 3 months? Is it 1 month? Is it a year? What are the terms? Because you're then only able to be represented to that company through that agency. And I have seen people, unfortunately, lose out on opportunities because they didn't get that clarity on the front end and they weren't selected for a position. Something else became available and that company didn't have it in their budget to pay an agency fee, and they lost out on the opportunity. Now, I will also say that I have seen agencies say, you know what, we're going to waive it for this person because we do enough business with you guys in these other areas that go ahead and hire so-and-so because it's the right thing to do. But they're not obligated to do that. That's something they do because of the relationship they have, and they don't have to.
And sometimes it's merely just the submittal of your name and not your resume. If you have a close enough relationship, they could say, hey, I've seen, has, John Short submitted his resume recently. He's an IT guy we're considering. Nope. Checked our database. Nope. But your name is now sitting with that company. So it can get real tricky.
Yeah. So it's all about expectations and clarity and transparency on everybody's behalf, for sure. All right. These are great topics. I'm so glad we got into these because I don't know that job seekers have this level of understanding when they're going and in the job seeking space. So I really appreciate all of the insight you guys have shared. Is there anything else you guys want to bring up so that anybody currently in the market has some additional insight or ammunition in their toolbox? We covered a lot, so. All right, so I think we're over time as well, so I want to be cognizant of that. So just lastly, I do want to thank everyone for joining us. I really do appreciate it. I specifically want to call out Suzanne, Dan, and Orlando. They've been really helpful in helping me put this presentation together, gave me some insight into some great questions. Their information is here. If you're interested in contacting any of them, please reach out and do so. If you're not able to see this slide for whatever reason, I'm happy to put you in touch with them as well. So thank you everyone for joining us on behalf of the Business of HR. I hope this was helpful. We did record this and I will be posting it once I edit out a little bit of the beginning and the end where there's just gaps and noise. But thank you all so very much. I appreciate you joining us and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Barbie.
Thanks, Barbie. Nice to meet you guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
It was a pleasure.